Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Andy. I'm a doctoral researcher here at Loughborough University, and I started in October last year. I'm also a freelance illustrator and senior lecturer in illustration at the University of Worcester. And I wanted to share with you today some of the initial work that I've made for my practice-based research degree, which is looking at how illustration can be used to investigate a sense of place. So the place that I've decided to focus on is the River Severn, which is the longest river in the UK. So the River Severn has been a barrier between kingdoms, an artery of trade during the Industrial Revolution. It has witnessed and caused deadly accidents and poses a constant flooding risk. It's been navigated by barges, coracles, ferries and surfboards that ride the Severn Bore. Trains run below the bedrock, and it's been spanned by many bridges. So all of these endeavours have resulted in a vast collection of personal stories yet to be told through illustration of those who lived, worked and died on and below this perilous river. And I'd now like to talk to you about some of these fascinating people. I previously mentioned a coracle, which is this kind of strange circular boat operated by a single paddle that can be carried on your back and transported across dry land. So the heritage of these crafts is well documented by the Iron Bridge Museum, with people such as Harry Rogers helping to tell the story. So my task as an illustrator is to visualize, is to make an image that communicates a message. So here, my starting point was one of the numerous photographs or videos of Harry Rogers, a man from a family of coracle makers who lived on the banks of the Severn. So this makes the visualization process pretty easy. But it means that accuracy influences the drawing process, as there is little ambiguity as to what the character looked like. However, how he behaved, spoke, moved and thought is less clear. Illustration is not just about recording what something looks like or looked like. It is about communicating the multifaceted nature of that subject. So this book records the travels and observations of Wilfred Byford Jones in the 1960s. He interviewed Rogers at his home, and the text-based evidence that I got from the book adds to my photographic starting point, and it helped me get a sense of him as a person. And this is the quote, which I found most intriguing. So reaching Harry's home on the riverbank, I found the garden full of pets, a badger, a fox cub, ferrets, and one favourite bird, a jackdaw, to which he talked as he worked. So here I've sort of animated the photographic starting point, and the character is suggesting movement whilst interacting with the other inhabitants of that particular place. So using Byford Jones's observation of Rogers' pets and his obvious fondness for them helped me to understand his personality. When developing characters, the unusual or the unexpected is exciting, as it instantly demands the attention of the viewer. So having a pet fox and jackdaw certainly helps. So I reflected on this process, and this pretty simple flowchart gives an overview of the different stages involved. Re-representation indicates the different stages of image creation. Illustration practice can involve a sequence of image conversions, starting with the initial sketch made from a photograph or in person, with the aim of producing what Raymond Williams describes as the visual embodiment of something. This is then developed into a more finalized design through several drawings and eventually a fully realized artwork. An illustration can be considered as what Edward S. Casey describes as a second representation, often in a medium different from that in which a first presentation has appeared, but that carries forward the content of the latter into a new representational format. So another fascinating story that I've discovered through my research is the lave net fishing, which involves wading out into the murky and dangerous water of the lower Severn, where it becomes this huge estuary, and using strange V-shaped net to capture salmon as they swim upstream. These sketchbook drawings are made directly from photographs within the Gloucestershire archive with a bit of embellishment. And I also have made drawings from documentary film footage. They're copies of photographs using pencils and pens. Making these drawings forces me to study my subject, what clothes they wore, their stance, and how they used this strange contraption to catch fish. Film footage was especially useful as the subtle movements are hard to grasp from static photographs. These men, and I found no images of women participating in this form of fishing, move silently through the water, carefully adjusting the nets in response to the flow of the river and the approaching fish. The net is then snapped up into the air, trapping their prize. So when I was looking at this, I didn't really feel that there was one particular person on whom I wanted to focus, as it was more of the process and the idea of this activity that I found most interesting. So I looked away from the archival imagery and made drawings based on my own drawings. So these various iterations of drawings allowed for deviation from reality. And as a result, more abstracted ideas of storytelling started to emerge. So this idea of the river forming the fish on which the men attempt to catch their salmon starts to bring in elements of magical realism, which I feel illustration is perfectly placed to do, sitting somewhere in between fact and fiction. This is one of the outcomes, one of the many outcomes that I made, but the one I feel best captures the story. The character is rather anonymous. His clothing perhaps suggests time other than the present day, but he could also inhabit the present. By keeping to graphic line for the character, there's little embellishment and clues to their personality. So he remains rather distant, a solitary figure engaged in this strange, silent and meditative practice of trying to catch a salmon. So now on to intriguing Matthias Siddan Matza. I was first introduced to him whilst reading brilliant Alice Oswald's A Sleepwalk on the Severn. He was a Finnish sailor who died after falling from his ship into the river. Oswald states, "This is not a play, this is a poem in several registers, set at night on the Severn estuary. Various characters, some living, some dead, all based on real people from the Severn catchment, talk towards the moment of moonrise and are changed by it." Siddan Matza is one of those spectral characters that appears in front of us. And I quote, "Enter unnamed sailor weeping with Matthias Siddan of Finland holding a rung of rigging." So Matthias was real, although it must be noticed that Oswald's spelling of his name differs from what I found through further archival investigation. I started to discover more and more about him, such as his nationality, his age, and how he died. I even have an idea of where he may be buried. So this process echoed the methodology of Oswald. He used exactly the same archives that I used to select the people she began to visualize through her words. So on this occasion, I had no photograph to copy to start my visualization. So I initially drew from my imagination. I then looked for other images of what I deemed to be similar subjects, images of fishermen, sailors, soldiers, all from the sort of era and place from which he came. So this is all a bit vague and hopeful and not very accurate. I started to draw as before from these various visual sources, but I also listened to sound recordings of Finnish folk songs, or just to add to this amalgamation of information, with the ultimate aim of creating an image of this person. So I drew, and I drew, and I drew some more, and I'm still drawing, to be honest. Due to the lack of visual reference or endpoint, the amount I drew in combinations of media had no limitation. So each drawing became a re-representation of the one that preceded it. So I used various processes, loads of different processes, such as collage, as by taking this approach forced me to produce work that was unexpected and lacked too much control, and would hopefully result in expressive work. Embrace the idea of chance by making quick ink blob shapes of the character's silhouette. And you can probably see a couple on the slide. I then draw over the top, reacting to the shape This is another process I've adopted in previous projects to help generate a range of visualizations of a character. The image on the right is my attempt to place Sid Matza into the environment of the River Severn. It's a photograph I made of the old Severn Bridge that's been drawn over to suggest him as some sort of ghost or presence, which he is. He lived and died on the river and therefore is part of it. I could start talking about ideas of space, time and world lines, but I think I need to do a bit more research about that. But they could certainly be considered here. The image on the left is a more graphic depiction of various bits of information, a montage of maps, text and drawing to give an overview of his story in a single image. So each has their own merits and offers me potential ways of working for the future. But this is the image which is probably closest that I've got to depicting the character as I imagine him. A young man in his 20s from the 19th century, working a difficult and dangerous job many miles from his homeland. I wonder if he looks a little bit stern. Ultimately, this project and various stages of re-representation can be traced back to a text-based starting point. Whereas with Harry Rogers and the Lathe Net Fisherman, photographic imagery of the subject initiated and perhaps had a greater impact on my creative process. So as I discussed, the photographic starting point of character development can be a rather linear one. As to my approach for visualizing Sid Matza, the path is far less straightforward. Other elements fed into this, such as related imagery, sounds, as well as my preconceived ideas of the character, their nationality and associated customs. The process is rather more cyclical. The resulting hybridized character is certainly multi-layered, but the level of ambiguity does start to pose questions for how reliable this method of illustration is for truly factual storytelling. Framing an illustration or a collection of illustrations as an entirely factual storytelling format can be problematic, and as an illustrator, I must acknowledge that. But this is not necessarily a negative, as illustration offers a rather enticing format for storytelling, suggesting the unknown, the middle ground. So when considering the character development process, I can draw inspiration from this particular fascinating story, which I've done some work on previously. Catherine Lack introduces her work as a reconstruction of one man's attempt to walk from England to Spain to worship at the shrine of St. James at Compostela. So she calls it the Cockleshell Pilgrim. The remains of the man, assumed to have been Robert Sutton, were uncovered in 1986 in Worcester Cathedral, which is this beautiful building that overlooks the River Severn in the centre of Worcester. They were accompanied by the artefacts of a pilgrim and a cockleshell, which is what you get if you walk to Compostela, suggesting he walked all the way to Santiago de Compostela, a journey of over 1,000 miles. She adopted a methodology of building upon facts, combining these with existing research describing other pilgrims' journeys, which resulted in the production of her own representation of Sutton. Lack describes her account of Sutton as follows: the framework is fact, the journey is a fiction. Lack is using storytelling techniques to encourage an engagement with a person long since dead, but who can still be visualized through the reading of a text. Illustrations are form that can investigate lives and articulate what has and has not been documented. Illustration has the potential for filling in the blanks, but also to create completely new chapters based on fact or fiction or something in between. Thanks. It's me.
Unmute ourselves so we can give you a round of applause.
Cheers.
Thank you very much indeed.
Sure.
What we will do is to save the questions. Oh, there's some online applause there as well for you. We'll save the questions till the end and then have questions for all of the presenters, if that's okay. So if you've got questions, if you want to stick them up in the chat, we will revisit those at the end of the session. So our next speaker, moving onwards, is Briti Deb, I think. Yeah, who is there? I hope with us. Yes, I can see you've unmuted yourself. Briti is talking about the role of philately in the art of storytelling, the case of Ramayana online. So over to you. You're very welcome.
Thanks, Professor. So I'll just share my screen.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, that looks good. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So good morning, everyone. The topic on which I'll be talking is the role of philately in art storytelling, the case of Ramayana. I'll give a brief background and introduction about the project, and then I'll go to some of the artistic forms that I'd like to share with you. So this topic has at least two keywords, main keywords. One is philately, and the other is Ramayana, the story of Ramayana. So I have been interested in philately since I was in school, and I did quite a lot of philatelic exhibition, and then I was thinking that what's something that's that I can take it forward, which also would lead to some research aspect on it. And then I thought that one of such topic could be the story itself, the storytelling using artistic forms. And that's what resulted to this project, where I'm using philately or stamps to tell the story, and in particular to tell the story of Ramayana. Telling stories are vital for effective communication, and we all tell stories. We all love to tell, and we all love to listen to stories. And there are problems which could happen if we do not know how to tell a good story. For example, it could result to social unrest and even business impact. So storytelling thus becomes very important in all aspects of life. And one of the oldest storytelling traditions in the world is the story of Ramayana. Ramayana is a novel in India, written many years ago, and the story of Ramayana is told in many traditions in the world, in particular the Southeast Asian countries. And the thing is, and the interesting thing is that though it is popular in many cultures, it is rarely discussed in academic context. And that's where I try to bridge a gap. I'm trying to bridge the gap of the storytelling of Ramayana and connect it to the academic context, so that it can be expanded in terms of research. This paper argues that storytelling, Ramayana, and postage stamps could be used as a research material to learn about the ancient tradition of storytelling through arts, as well as build up a new hobby of stamp collecting or philately. So humans have been telling stories with various art forms since a long time, and when our ancestors used to live in caves and make cave paintings. So we all have heard about, many of us have heard about the Sulawesi island in Indonesia, very famous for its cave paintings, and probably it was this type of cave paintings were made thousands of years ago. In one of the paper, it's mentioned that it's 44,000 years ago when it was created. These cave paintings were created. And since then, several art forms have been developed for storytelling, such as painting, animation, comic, cartoon, puppet play, mask dance, to name a few. So the story of Ramayana has been adapted in several countries, mostly in Asia and in particular Southeast Asia. And stamps have been used as an information source in libraries, in children's art, in visualizing countries. However, not much work has been done in the area of storytelling through stamps. And though storytelling Ramayana through arts is popular in many countries, Ramayana storytelling in postage stamps still is rarely discussed in academic context. So we conducted a comparative study of Ramayana stamps in multiple years and multiple countries. And we're trying to show how the characters in Ramayana are expressed over time and space in several countries and over the last few decades.
Hi, Briti. Sorry, I just want to pause. I just wanted to let you know that your slides aren't moving. And if they were meant to be, they're not.
Actually, I can, yeah. So I'm seeing my slides are moving. So probably there's some technical issue. Let me try to sort it out.
There we go. That's better.
Okay. So are you able to see the slide titled method?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And are you able?
Oh, they're moving now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll let you carry on.
Sure. So here, that my approach is the following: that I have tried to collect stamps on Ramayana stories over multiple years and multiple countries, and I have tried to show how the story of Ramayana has traveled from India to several other cultures, and how it has been adapted by those cultures. There has been limited number of papers and journal articles available on this topic. However, they're very limited, and that is one of the motivation why I have chosen this topic as my research subject. So, coming to the actual art forms, let's start with paintings. And in terms of paintings, there are several genres of paintings. Here we see a couple of them. So the first row shows two genres of paintings that have been popularized for telling the story of Ramayana. One is the Pattam Katha, and the other is the Pattachitra. Pattam Katha in the left side, and the Pattachitra in the right hand side, the stamp. So these two are very old painting forms, hundreds of years old, and they have been traditionally used to tell the story of Ramayana. Though lately they are used in many other stories, but Ramayana has remained a central point of these two art forms. The bottom two stamps show yet another genre of storytelling. The left hand side is the Madhubani Mithila, and the right hand side is a Yemeni painting, which also depicts the story of Ramayana, and they are also quite old in terms of their usage. And the left hand side is primarily used in India, and the right hand side is a Yemeni painting, and the stamp was issued in 1967, indicating that even a couple of decades back, this type of paintings and telling the story of Ramayana were quite popular in other cultures. Now, I have been trying to find out if this kind of stamps and Ramayana story are available in any of the European cultures. And one of them that I found is shown in the right-hand side, which is a Czech Republic stamp showing the Kamasan painting. So the stamp is issued by Czech Republic in 2007, which is showing a Kamasan's genre of painting, telling the story of Ramayana. And the Kamasan painting originated in Indonesia, in the island of Bali. So here we see a fusion of several cultures, art forms. The stamp issued by Czech Republic and the Ramayana originated in India, and the painting form of Kamasan, which was developed in Bali, Indonesia. So several cultures resulted to this type of art form in the stamp. The left-hand side stamp shows again the Kamasan painting, and the stamp was issued by Indonesia in 2016, indicating some of the stories of Ramayana. Now, the story of Ramayana was not only limited to paintings, it also expanded to other art forms such as murals. And here we see the Thailand 2016 issue, 2 stamps showing Khon dance. So Khon dance is a very popular form of dance in Thailand, and it has been traditionally used to tell the story of Ramayana, though lately it is used in many other storytelling. And this stamp is one of that indicates how popular the story of Ramayana is in Thailand in terms of philatelic interests. Bas relief is yet another form of art where the story of Ramayana has been told. And here we see 2 stamps, one issued by Indonesia in the left-hand side, and the other issued by India in 2018. Both are bas reliefs, and therein the story of Ramayana has been told. The storytelling Ramayana has not only limited to paintings and bas reliefs, but also can be seen in art forms such as comic and cartoon. And here we see a Thailand 2003 issue stamp showing the cartoon character Pangpon with Hanuman. So Hanuman is a character in Ramayana. And in Thailand, the Pangpon is a very popular cartoon character, and they have combined these 2 characters into one stamp, and this is what is shown in this photo. So we see that even in Thailand, even cartoons and comics, this type of things are being mixed with Ramayana characters, and they're coming now in stamps and trying to tell the story of Ramayana in a sort of in a new way. Combining different cultures, different other forms of art and stories. Masks are yet another art form which has been used to tell the story of Ramayana. Here we have three stamps showing 3 different kinds or forms of mask art. In the left-hand side, we see an Indian mask art issued in 1974 and depicting the character Ravana. So Ravana is a character in Ramayana who has 10 heads, and here we can see the one of the head in the center is a big one, and the other other 9 heads are the smaller in size. And this character is not only popular in terms of Ramayana as a story, but we see here it is also popular in stamps. In the middle, we see a stamp issued again by India, and which shows another mask dance form, which is called Chow dance. So Chow dance is a dance form in India, and they wear when they are dancing, they wear this kind of masks. And they tell the story of Ramayana through their physical movements. In the right-hand side, we see a Laos mask issued in 1997, which is popular in Laos to tell the story of Ramayana through several of their dance forms. The story is also told in holograms. So here we see a holographic stamp, and in there we can see several Ramayana characters being used to tell the story. And it seems like it's a puppet dance. The puppets are being controlled by several people, and the stamp is a holographic stamp. So when we move the stamp with our hand, we can see that the dancers are moving, and that's that's a new way of telling the story using holograms and through the stamps. So that the hologram was 3D type of art. Now we also can see the Ramayana 2D art in 2D art forms, and here we see a stamp issued by India in 2017, which shows in 2D animation several characters and several stories of Ramayana in one miniature set. So in Philately, we call it a miniature set where several stamps are there, and each of the stamps tells a chapter of Ramayana. Shadow puppet is yet another art form, and we see here three stamps issued by Indonesia in 1974 showing the wayang puppet. So wayang is a very popular dance form in Indonesia, and we can see three different art forms showing the character of Hanuman and some other characters of Ramayana. And these are very popular dance forms. These are also used in Indonesia as a puppet dance. So they use stick figures and they control the stick figures, their hand movements through strings, and that's how they control the movement of these puppets. So these are very popular art forms in Indonesia called wayang puppets, and here we see some of them. So finally, we have seen that Ramayana, though started as a story, it moved to different. It resulted to different art forms, starting from masks to paintings to 2D and 3D art, and also comic and cartoon figures. So all these results, all this has come not from one culture. This also has come from several cultures. So the above analysis motivates us to propose storytelling learning activities based on philately that use art as an instructional tool. So the motivation is that can we use stamps or philately as a subject to tell a good story, and also use it as a learning tool, so that we can present it in art in the art museums or exhibitions, not only as an exhibit but also to teach dance forms with masks, with puppets, and several other art forms. In future, this type of research could be taken in different directions, such as one is to build a website which would allow the users to paint or draw using very simple emoticons and other story elements. We can also use this kind of research to understand the doll making, puppet making, and the fashion design. If we can use some of these dolls and puppets in fashion industry, so that we can make arts in merchandise, in the clothes. And we can also use this kind of research in developing robots which would narrate stories. So can we build robots which tells a good story using this kind of methodologies? So I would stop my talk here, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Great, thank you very much. As I was saying, please put your questions in the chat, and we'll come back to them in a moment. Do you want to stop sharing your screen? That's it. That's great. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And we shall move on to our next presenter, who is Esther Perez Nieto. And Esther is talking about Microworlds of Crisis and Resilience through Documentary Film Practices, Netflix's quarantine anthology, Homemade. So Esther, if you'd like to, you can unmute yourself, turn your camera on, and the floor will be yours. I can see Esther is there. There you are, Esther.
Can you hear me?
We can indeed, yes. Thank you very much indeed. I'll hand over to you. If you want to share your screen, please feel free. And if you are doing that, if you just want to do it now, and then I can tell you that it's working at our end.
Okay. Can you see
That's
my
perfect.
screen?
We can indeed. Yeah, that is fantastic. Great. I shall hand over to you. I shall mute ourselves, and then it's all over to you.
Okay. So, hello, everyone. Well, shall I pin myself so I can see? Okay, I see myself. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's quite early here in Mexico. I hope you're enjoying this conference as much as I am. So my name is Esther Perez. I work at the Complutense University of Madrid, and my area of expertise is film studies from a feminist and cultural studies approach. I'm going to talk about Netflix quarantine anthology called Homemade. You tell me if my slides aren't moving. So what do the well-known actress Kristen Stewart with insomnia, the figures of Queen Elizabeth II and the Pope having an affair, the poor neighborhood of Clichy-Montfermeil in Paris seen from above with a drone, or a young girl singing inside the fridge have in common? Well, they are all images of the pandemic. So in June 2020, 4 months after the outbreak of a pandemic that forced a worldwide lockdown, the Netflix platform launched a series of short films that surprised audiences as well as critics. The project, entitled Homemade, brought together 17 works shot in different countries during these months of confinement. The challenge was clear. What film would you make during the COVID crisis with the means at your disposal? The producers of this groundbreaking project were Italian Lorenzo Mieli from the Apartment Pictures and the Chilean brothers Juan de Dios and Pablo Larraín from Fabiola. They left total freedom to the creators. The result, as you can see here, was a unique anthology with documentary films, audiovisual essays, intimate family footage, and even surreal fictions. The participating filmmakers involved 9 women and 9 men, located in 10 different countries. The cities included Beirut, Los Angeles, London, Mexico City, New York, Santiago, Lisbon, among others. So, this analysis focuses on those films with a documentary or an essayistic perspective. They function as microworlds to bring out emotions of frustration, grief, and uncertainty. They mainly represent claustrophobic situations and emotional insecurity during this confinement. So our objectives are, firstly, to identify the filmmakers' prevalent concerns. We have focused on 2 main points here, childhood and family. Secondly, due to time constraints, to exemplify with a film the use of family archives as contemporary heterotopias, what I have called crisis antidotes. So let me start with the prevalent concerns in this project. The first is childhood. The first one is childhood. It has been approached from different cinematic styles, but some ideas are common to its creators. Firstly, a constant reflection on the importance of care tasks as unavoidable and necessary actions. Has the busy life we have been leading made us forget this? Second, this brings us to the second axis, which is the memory of the filmmaker's own childhood and the acknowledgement of the parents' sacrifices. And finally, a look at the present. How will children and teens grow up in the post-COVID world? What will be the scars of this time of confinement? And a more pounding question, what can I do to ease their pain? Which is what filmmakers say all the time. So on the fear of future and the need to take responsibility for taking care of others and oneself nowadays, I recommend Maggie Nelson's book on freedom, which has been very inspiring in the analysis of these films. So I highly recommend you could read this book, 4 Songs on Care and Constraint. So here I am using examples of films directed by men and women on purpose, because I initially expected to find a radical difference between the two of them, but what I actually found was that both had similar concerns and in very different territories. We can discuss that later together. So, here, in order, we see a mother cat representing the need for nurturing in the film Mama's Dumpling Recipe, that was made in Jalisco, in Mexico. The second image is from The Lucky Ones. It depicts the filmmaker's mother and herself in a hospital while the former was ill with cancer. And finally, we see the filmmaker's daughter, Davy Mackenzie's daughter, who is worried about growing up in this environment. So this raises the problem of future and the question of whether there is a future at all, and under what conditions and for whom. So connected to childhood, we have family concerns. Firstly, we identified a renewed interest in recovering family cultural roots, a resistance to forgetting traditions and spirituality. An example of this is the film by the London-based filmmaker of Indian origin, Gurinder Chadha. She teaches Hindi songs to her children and participates in a global prayer for the victims of COVID in her film. Secondly, probably the most painful aspect of this confinement, which has been the distance from loved ones. In the films, we see different strategies to get closer to others, such as video calls. We all have experimented that. And the third point connects us to the first one on childhood. In the films, the family is portrayed as a safe environment in which to grow up and then learn essential tasks. So parents and their children have never had, as during the pandemic, and I quote, the gift of time together. So here we can see Gurinder Chadha in the praying with her twin children. And on the right, the large number of screens that join the worldwide prayer for the victims of COVID. And we arrive to our last point, film as crisis antidotes. So when time is out of joint, as Hamlet puts it, we may need to set it right, or at least feel that we have some kind of control over our fears. So this is what heterotopias can offer. Historically, human beings have used mental structures based on linear time to understand reality. Michel Foucault identified a shift from time to space. This change of paradigm is characteristic of postmodern thought. That is since the second half of the 20th century. So heterotopias are spaces of possibility in which contradictory forces converge. They are outside the dualistic structures of utopias and dystopias. Here, in the image above, there is Rachel Morrison with the filmmaker, with her mother. And at the bottom, there is Morrison with her son. So we have chosen the film The Lucky Ones by Rachel Morrison, which is one essay with the form of a filmic letter. Here, Rachel talks to her son Wiley. It is a letter that addresses the future as well as the past, as we can see here in the images. All images of herself and her mother are intertwined with lots of photographs and videos taken during the months of confinement. They work as special temporal bridges, creating a safe space for Wiley and his sister Cleo. So, as we have seen, when time is out of joint and space is claustrophobic, we may need to build imaginary places to express pain, and also to connect with our feelings and others' needs. So Homemade has proved to be a successful creative project that brings together different ways of accomplishing this task. I will end with a quote from Morrison's film, which brings together the great topics of family and childhood, along with the family archives as an antidote to the COVID crisis. So I read, "While I wrestle with anxiety and try to stave off despair, I hope you recall the quarantine as neighbors disguised as ninjas, superhero karaoke, and pajamas all day long. While I learn the art of patience, sitting with uncertainty, you are learning to read, to write, to swim. We are the lucky ones. We are the fortunate few with food on the table and enough savings to get by." So to conclude, I want to say that in this project, it is very enriching how alternative and non-Western views are mixed with works made in Europe and the United States too. They establish a dialogue, and in conclusion, I have seen that once the technical means or the budget are out of comparative equations, in this particular case of the pandemic, their fears about the future haven't been so distant. And as I have expressed, I believe in cinema as a therapy weapon. And I think it has been very important for many people during the pandemic. So, and also we can discuss about men and women and if their approach are different, which I say I haven't found that they have different concerns during this project. So thank you very much. Here's my email if you wish to contact me.
Thank you very much indeed. That was great. Again, another reminder, please put questions in the chat. Now, our final presenters, I just want to check whether they're online or not. Now, my program tells me they're meant to be in person, but they're not here. And that's Giuditta Rossi and Cristina Morelli. If you are online, and maybe under a different name, please make yourself known and we can have your presentation. If not, we'll be able to move straight to questions. Great, I think we're straight on to questions then. We've got a bit of time for some questions, that's good. Now then, let's see what we've got. Have you spotted some questions, Jenny?
There was one question from Beth. I don't know if Beth is still there and whether she wants to ask it. If not, I can.
Okay, Beth, yes.
Yep,
yeah, please ask your question, Beth.
Hello everyone. Yeah, I found this was for Andy, the first presentation. Thought it was lovely. Those illustrations looked fantastic, and I was interested in the digital archives that you used. Which digital archives you used, and sort of your experience with them and how they contributed.
Yeah. So the main one was the kind of Gloucestershire archives and the Bristol archives. So they're pretty good because they've got a huge range of imagery and also kind of text-based stuff to kind of work with. More archives I kind of look at, the more frustrated I'm getting with it, because often you can't actually access. And you have to, some of the archives you have to book an appointment, and it's just not, it wasn't possible during the pandemic. But yeah, it was Gloucestershire archives, Bristol archives. I even started to look at for the Matthias Siddhamatsa story, looking at the Finland Museum of Navigation. I think I think that might be the right name. And they had a few pieces online, but again, it's really difficult. It's almost like there's a bit of a kind of a gateway which is locked to you, and it does seem to be kind of need to know a secret code to get in. It's quite frustrating. But more and more I'm looking at the BFI website and just doing simple searches and getting a huge sort of collection of footage about the Seven, these kind of like throwaway clips which news reporters were making in the 1960s, which never made the cut for the report. It's like 30-second clips, but you're seeing the world in the 1960s or 70s or 80s, and on their own they're quite boring films, but for me it's just visual reference. It's brilliant. So it's kind of almost like trying to piece things together, and then that brings into the question of how authentic is it as a whole, and that's something I kind of need to work out, I think.
And can I suggest maybe have a look at Europeana if you haven't? I work for Europeana, europeana.eu, because it brings together digitized collections from all across Europe, all sorts of things from all sorts of places. I have no idea what's there about Seven, but you never know. And brilliant. You can download things and you can see the right statements and everything. So.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions? Raise your hand or whatever. I have a question. Well, I have questions for both Esther and Deb, which I'll tell if no one else has a question. So I'll start with Deb. If I could, sorry, Briti. I'm really interested about the use of philately, and as a teenager, I was also a stamp collector, and I've always thought of stamps as being a kind of a form of public art, and I was looking at the stamps that you were showing us, and it seemed to me that some of the stamps were representations of other forms of visual representation. So the bas reliefs, or the shadow puppets, they were representations that had been made of the story, and then they were framed within the stamp. And there were maybe others that seemed to be more original artworks, original interpretations by the artist of the story. They were done specifically for the stamps. Is that right? Or have I understood that correctly? Or maybe you could comment a little bit on the differences.
Yes, Mike. So you are absolutely right at identifying, that most of the stories that are told in stamp visually, they have already been published somewhere else. Either it is a painting, or if it is a dance form, or if it's a mask, they have already been published or shown somewhere else before. And because of their popularity, and the country or the culture wants to propagate the mass message, they bring it to stamp. And stamps are one of the best ways to advertise, free of cost. It just flows all over the world. So you are absolutely right at identifying that. However, one point that I would like to make is that it's sort of hard to bring an original art form directly into stamp. I mean, nowadays we are seeing art forms coming into NFT, non-fungible tokens, and this type of blockchain technologies. But to bring it to philately or art, I mean, this is a wonderful idea, actually, Professor, what you have just now mentioned. But I think, we are yet to develop a methodology or something which is a easy way to do it. If it is possible, I'd be very happy, because that would be a wonderful way to propagate art, and even more artists would come in, because their art would flow all around the world through stamps. But that's a very good point, actually. How can we do that? Yeah.
That's really interesting, because I'd always felt that stamps, as I say, were kind of public art, and they were framed by the edges of the stamp. There's an actual frame, a physical framing to the image that happens with stamps. And we have in the UK, we have quite a famous or well-known artist and illustrator called David Gentleman, who was also, he is still alive, very old now, but he's still alive. And he made really some of his most famous artwork actually is stamp design, and he made it in the 70s and 80s. So I think there's a very interesting sort of interaction and interface between something as utilitarian as the postage stamp and the work of artists, and artists using stamps as ways of promoting their work. That's very interesting. Let me move on. I'm just trying to see whether there's any other further questions in the chat. I can't see any. So I'm going to ask Esther my question. I'm going to take chair's privilege and ask a second question to Esther, which is really, I guess, I suppose this is implicated within the title of these films, but I was interested in the domestic, and it seems that a lot of the stories themselves have a very heavy presence of the domestic, and I was wondering how that was played out across these films. Is the domestic a place of sanctuary? Is it a place of disruption? How is it interpreted? Because it seems to be a very heavy presence.
Thank you for your question. I have seen different approaches to this topic, and I believe some of them have used home as a sanctuary to feel safe and to feel with family, but also we have the distance problem. So it is also, I think it is a material way to say, I'm not with my loved ones because I am enclosed here. So I think it is contradictory forces converge in these films, which is why they are so interesting, because they were made without technological means and with a low budget. So they film what they could see at home, and at home they had children who were very stressed because they couldn't go to see their friends. Also babies that couldn't be outside and they cry all the time. Also they have pets that couldn't go outside too, or they have old family very far from home who were dying and they couldn't go to see them or to say goodbye. So I think the domestic can be both, can be a very scary place when we can't go outside, and also a place to feel safe from the pandemic that were very dangerous for our health. So I think both, and that's why cinema is so interesting to express both feelings.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I suppose one of the things the pandemic has taught us is understanding home as both haven and prison at the same time, and understanding those kinds of dynamics. And I guess with cinema, it has become even more so something which we consumed quite voraciously within the context of our own homes, rather than going out. We couldn't go out to actually to communally enjoy films together. We were all, subscribing to our streaming channels and so forth. That's great. Thank you very much. Let me just see whether we have a few people in the room. I have my back to them, you see, so I'm turning around to see whether there are any questions from the room. Yes, we do have one from Irina. Do you want to come forward, Irina, and ask a question?
Hello, I have a question to the gentleman who was presenting the Philately. Deb, I think his name is Deb. Yes. So you mentioned what the future development you see for the Philately usage of storytelling is dedicated to robots are going to tell the stories, and I'm thinking about the ethics here quite seriously, because robots don't have any consciousness. They don't have conscience, but nor do they have a consciousness. So if you give two machines to tell the stories, you don't know what stories we are going to produce, because they don't understand. They can repeat the words, but they don't have understanding. So don't you see any problem for the meaning of the storytelling, which is actually supposed to promote something best in the people and humanity and give it to the hands of the machines.
So it's a question about the ethics of the automation of storytelling and story creation.
Yeah, Irene, I think that's an interesting point that you raised. So the first thing is that yes, if the robots tell stories, there is a risk that they will tell the wrong stories or stories that would cause problems, catastrophes. Now, leave that. Let's assume that we won't allow that. Okay, will the world still be safer? Now, if we see the humans telling stories in Twitter, Facebook, and all the social media, don't we have problem with humans telling the wrong stories or stories being understood, or problems spreading even from human storytelling? Don't we have that problem? So yes, definitely robots are not the solution or silver bullet for all the problems, but we need to understand that even humans do some mistakes or lead to problems. And that's what we need to understand, that none itself is not a solution. We need to combine everything possible in order to get the best out of it and try to not use or suppress the bad in whatever form it has. You are totally correct at identifying that robots can lead to problem, but here my point is that we need to take the good out of the robots and leave out the bad from using it.
Thank you. I've got a feeling that could actually be a whole conference in itself, this whole question around ethics and automation and so forth. Well, thank you very much. We're just about out of time because we're as you know, we're running a little bit late on the program today, so we want to give people a quick 5-minute break before the next session starts. Thank you very much to our presenters for a fascinating session, really very much appreciated. And if we could give them a final either digital or analog round of applause, that would be great. Thank you. And we hope to see you all at another session later on today. Thank you very much indeed.